Today's video is kind of based upon a handout that I have written up on this whiteboard here. You have to excuse my handwriting. I have doctor's handwriting, but it's a handout that I give to my students quite early on in our hypnotherapy diploma. And it's a means of introducing cognitive therapy, first of all. Cognitive therapy based upon the kind of principles of the founders, Aaron Beck in particular, and with the influence of Albert Ellis as well. So we kind of introduce the principles of cognitive therapy into the hypnotherapist skill set, and where that sits, how that fits with a hypnotherapist, and how that sort of creates a sort of cognitive hypnotherapy approach. So we're talking about cognitive hypnotherapy, and one of the best ways in which I introduce it as a concept and the kind of processes, the journey, the cycle, if you like, of cognitive hypnotherapy to our students is similar to the way in which I explain it to my clients as well. And we do that with a very particular handout that looks like this, except it's a handout, and this is my whiteboard. So up here, written in black, we've got some categories of what is a thought form, a sort of rather rudimentary or fundamental thought form. When you look in cognitive therapy books or resource websites where they offer thought forms, you can get ones that are much more complex. I mean, the rare one that's a little simpler, but this is rather basic. And so in black at the top are the categories in the forms, the columns within a form that you'd give to a client and start to explain to them. In the first column is where you write your negative thought. In the second column, you'll label that thought. In the third column, you'll have you'll write a little bit about the negative impact of the thought. In the fourth column is where you engage in disputation regarding the thought, and in the final column, you write down your new positive thought. And so in blue, underneath each of those columns that are written out in a thought form that typically a cognitive hypnotherapist would equip their client with as a means of policing, self-monitoring, and developing their thought processes. These sections in blue are pretty much how you explain it to your client. So I've given them the thought form, for example, and then want to educate them with regards to how to use it in order to update their cognitions. So when we're talking about cognitions, we're talking about pretty much anything that goes on inside of one's head that can be verbalized. So that's not just kind of internal dialogue and self-talk, that's also opinions, values, ideas, judgments, and so on, you know, the beliefs, the full broad spectrum. And very often these are negative, and they contribute to problematic feelings and behaviors and so on, and so very often need to be updated. And that's what a thought form is designed to do on a very basic level, that you equip the client with it. They have a sort of very practical means of using this to update their thoughts. But it's exponentially more than that for my purposes here today, and it's much more than that for the client's purposes as well. So once we've equipped them with a form of this kind, we'll explain to them. So this first column is where you write down the negative thought exactly as you thought it. So unabridged. We want the negative thought, when the client spots it, to write it down in this particular column so they can see it. Very often, just getting thoughts outside of one's head is incredibly therapeutic and valuable. Many pieces of research support this notion. You know, the brain is a fantastical thing. Often I liken it to the candy floss machine, whereby a simple stick is like the thought. So the stick, if you leave it inside the candy floss machine, it whirs around, it becomes a big pink fluffy gooey mess. Likewise, the thought, if it's just left inside of the head to whir around, can often become a big pink fluffy gooey mess. It can contribute to many problems. So we want to take the thought out of there, and then take the stick out of there to stop that from happening. And the way in which we do that is to heighten our awareness of the thought. So we get it out of our head and we write it down. We write it down exactly as you thought it. So unabridged, like I said, unedited, and they will write that down in the column. Now, for you at the moment, you want to ignore all this stuff in red because that's therapist stuff. We're teaching the client, first of all, how to use the form with these blue sections. And so the blue section here, you ask the client just to write the thought down. We also will educate them on a classic number of different ways in which, or classic and popular negative thoughts, problematic thoughts. And very often, I have a handout that has categories of all different types of popular negative thoughts or cognitive distortions, thinking errors as they are referred by many of the authors on these subjects. This might be black and white thinking or emotional reasoning or catastrophizing or something. So having equipped them with that handout with all of these different categories in, and having written down their negative thought in this first column on their thought form, their next task in the next column is to label it. So write down which label suits this thought. So what we're doing here is just encouraging the client to recognize that this is quite common, it's been spotted as a thinking error before, and have them aware of the nature of that thinking error. So they label it and heighten their awareness of what they're doing and how they're doing it. The third step for them when they're using this particular form is to engage in some intelligent reasoning and write down how they think having that thought adversely affects them, and to note anything that's incorrect with that thought. So that is, well, by having this particular thought, I'm perpetuating the issue. I'm making things worse. I'm contributing to my anxiety or my poor quality mood or my problem, whatever it may be. So just to become aware of the negative impact of the thought that they've written down and labeled. And now they'll just kind of write down that negative impact, how it's detrimentally contributing to the issue. Then we get on with the kind of therapying process, the change element of the process. I mean, all of this up until now really is sort of 30 seconds to 1 minute job. Then we get on to disputing it, and disputation can happen in a wide number of different ways, but typically, having educated the client about things like Socratic questioning, they start to dispute it, and that is, seeking the evidence for having that thought and disputing it intelligently. Seeking, looking for the logic in it, or disputing the logic within that particular thought. And the idea is to dispute the thought intelligently, ideally using Socratic questions, soberly, objectively, and so on. Having disputed it and recognized that it's a problematic thought, the final step then is to replace it. And that is, having refuted it, disputed it, we want to fill that space with something better, a better thought. So we write in the final column a better thought, an alternative thought that's going to be better for them. And ideally, as a hypnotherapist, we will teach the client classic rules of suggestion, how to So additionally to the sort of A times B equals C notion as well, we can add in there ACT down here, acceptance and commitment therapy. So rather than full-blown disputation, combining hypnosis with acceptance and commitment therapy, that enables somebody to create space within and be okay with the feelings that are attached to the cognitions. And that might be something else in a slightly different direction that we teach the client and we explain to them. So the overriding objective of having this handout is that it demonstrates how to construct and how to educate the client with regards to some of the basic concepts of cognitive therapy, what the purposes are behind it, but how we then import all of that into the hypnotherapy skill set and make it relevant to us as a hypnotherapist, and how we would then introduce cognitive therapy and create a cognitive hypnotherapy skill set. for our clients, and the kind of interventions, the kind of skill sets that we have and that we then relay and educate our client about in terms of the wide range of different stuff that we can do too. Hope you found that useful. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back soon. Toodaloo.